The Galactic Council's most advanced civilizations have developed perfect universal translators and communication protocols, but when humanity applies for membership, their representative, a seemingly dim-witted maintenance worker named Tobias Crank, scores absolute 0 on every linguistic competency test, appearing to be the dumbest species ever encountered. Just as the Council prepares to reject humanity with maximum prejudice, Tobias whispers something in an ancient Earth language that shouldn't even exist anymore. The words somehow bypass their quantum shields, crash their translation matrices, and reveal a terrifying truth about human linguistic evolution. Turns out humans didn't just preserve dead languages, they weaponized them. And Tobias isn't a janitor. He's humanity's secret weapon, fluent in over 200 extinct Earth tongues that predate galactic civilization itself. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Linguistic Council buzzed with the kind of anticipatory energy usually reserved for public executions or really good comedy shows. Today it promised to be both. Commander Veyron adjusted his ceremonial translator crown, a ridiculous contraption that looked like someone had crossed a disco ball with a squid, and surveyed the assembled delegates. Representatives from 47 different species filled the amphitheater, their various appendages, tentacles, and breathing apparatus creating a symphony of alien smugness that could be heard 3 sectors away. "Esteemed colleagues," Veyron announced, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd never been wrong about anything in his considerably long life, "today we witness what may very well be the shortest membership evaluation in Council history." A ripple of anticipation-flavored laughter echoed through the chamber. The Zephyrians clicked their crystalline beaks in amusement. The Nethys delegation wiggled their probability-sensing tendrils with barely contained glee. Even the usually stoic Grim Collective managed what passed for chuckling among their species, a sound like grinding metal having an existential crisis. Captain Sable rose from her position at the evaluation console, her 4 arms gracefully manipulating holographic interfaces that displayed more linguistic complexity than most species encountered in a lifetime. She was Altarian, a race so advanced they'd solved communication centuries ago by simply thinking at each other really hard. "The subject arrives," she announced with the kind of professional detachment reserved for announcing particularly boring weather patterns. The main entrance dilated with a wet sucking sound that never failed to make newcomers uncomfortable, and through it stepped, well, calling him a disappointment would be generous, Tobias Crank shuffled into the most advanced linguistic testing facility in known space, wearing what appeared to be maintenance coveralls held together by optimism and industrial-grade duct tape. His tool belt jangled with implements that looked suspiciously like they belonged in a bathroom repair kit rather than on a galactic representative. A name tag reading "Toby, ask me about pipe unclogging" hung crooked on his chest. The silence was deafening. 47 species, possessing collective intelligence that could calculate the meaning of existence before lunch, stared at humanity's chosen representative with the kind of disbelief usually reserved for witnessing someone try to eat soup with a fork. "This," whispered Lieutenant Nova to her seat neighbor, "is going to be better than that time the Grobnaks tried to apply for membership by submitting their grocery list." Tobias looked around the chamber with the expression of someone who'd just realized he might have taken a wrong turn at the space elevator. He raised one grease-stained hand in what might charitably be called a wave. Hi there," he said, his voice carrying all the cosmic authority of a particularly confused tourist. "I'm looking for the, He squinted at a piece of paper that looked like it had been used as a napkin. "The Galactic Linguistic Council thingy. Someone said there'd be tests?" Commander Veyron closed his eyes and counted to 10 in 17 different languages, a skill that had served him well in diplomatic situations. When he opened them, the human was still there, still looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. "Yes," Veyron said slowly, the way one might explain basic physics to a particularly slow asteroid, "you are here for humanity's linguistic competency evaluation. I am Commander Veyron, chairman of this council. These are your assessors." "Cool. Tobias nodded sagely, then looked around the room again. "So, where's the bathroom?" The collective intake of breath from 47 species created a minor atmospheric disturbance. Captain Sable stepped forward, her professional composure cracking slightly. "Perhaps we should begin the evaluation immediately. Time is valuable." "Oh, right. Sure thing, ma'am." Tobias shuffled over to the testing station, his boots squeaking against the polished floor with each step. "So what kind of tests are we talking about here? Like multiple choice, essay questions?" "I was never much good at essays." Major Zenith leaned over to Admiral Cypher. I'm starting a betting pool on how quickly this ends. Current odds are 6 minutes before complete failure. I'll take 4, Sci-Fi whispered back. Look at him. He's examining the quantum interface like it's a broken vending machine. Captain Sable activated the first assessment protocol with the kind of flourish reserved for revealing particularly impressive magic tricks. Holographic displays materialized around Tobias, showing complex linguistic matrices that pulsed with mathematical beauty. We begin with basic galactic common, she announced. Standard proficiency level, please translate the following phrase. The cosmic winds carry messages between distant stars. Tobias stared at the floating symbols for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. The chamber held its collective breath. Is that supposed to be English? He asked finally. The betting pool immediately shifted to 3 minutes. Admiral Sci-Fi stepped forward with the kind of predatory smile that suggested he was about to enjoy this far more than professional decorum should allow. His species, the Valkyrie, had evolved past the need for vocal communication 3 millennia ago, making him the Council's expert on advanced linguistic theory. Watching primitives struggle with basic concepts was his favorite hobby, right after collecting vintage thought crystals and judging other species' breathing patterns. Perhaps, he said, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension that could corrode hull plating, we should move to something more appropriately challenging for our human friend. The holographic displays shifted, now showing complex molecular diagrams that danced and merged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. This was molecular communication theory, the art of encoding messages in quantum particle arrangements. Most species took decades to master even the basics. Mr. Crank, Sci-Fi continued, savoring the ridiculous name like a fine wine, please demonstrate your understanding of subatomic linguistic encoding by translating this simple molecular message. Tobias leaned forward, squinting at the swirling particles with the intense concentration of someone trying to read assembly instructions written in disappearing ink. The molecular structures pulsed with ethereal beauty, spelling out what any competent galactic citizen would recognize as "Welcome to our peaceful assembly." Well, Tobias said after a moment, that stretched longer than a supernova's death throes, it looks like atoms doing things? Lieutenant Nova nearly choked on her breathing mixture. She quickly activated her personal communicator, broadcasting on the Council's unofficial entertainment frequency. Betting now open on total failure categories. Current odds, complete linguistic incompetence, 3-1. Species-wide intellectual disability, 5-1. Elaborate practical joke, 20-1. The responses flooded in faster than escape pods from a failing reactor. Captain Sable, her professional composure beginning to show stress fractures, decided to demonstrate the depths of human inadequacy more thoroughly. Let's try hyperdimensional grammar, she announced, her 4 arms weaving through control interfaces with fluid precision. The air itself began to bend as concepts that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously manifested in the testing space. Hyperdimensional grammar wasn't just language. It was reality restructuring itself to accommodate meaning that couldn't exist in normal space-time. The Nexari had developed it to discuss concepts so advanced they literally couldn't be thought about without expanding one's consciousness across multiple reality planes. Please parse the following statement, Sable instructed, and respond using appropriate transdimensional verb conjugations. The statement hung in the air like a living thing, its meaning shifting through layers of existence that made observers dizzy just trying to perceive it. To properly understand it, one needed to think in at least 9 dimensions, while simultaneously existing in 3 different probability states. Tobias stared at the impossible grammar construct for exactly 47 seconds. Several council members were timing him now for their betting pools, then raised his hand like a student asking to use the restroom. Yeah, I'm gonna go with I have no idea what any of this means, he said cheerfully. Also seriously, where's your bathroom? I had a lot of coffee before I got here. Major Zenith discreetly activated his personal terminal and began composing what would undoubtedly be the most devastating species rejection notice in galactic history. The standard template designed for merely incompetent applicants wouldn't suffice. He was going to need something special, something that properly conveyed the sheer cosmic absurdity of humanity's application. Perhaps, suggested Colonel Vortex from his position in the Advanced Observer section, we should try psionic syntax. Surely even they can manage basic thought-language interfaces. The suggestion was met with approving murmurs. Palative Fleet. Psionic syntax was considered the most fundamental form of advanced communication, literally thinking in structured patterns that others could perceive directly. It required no technology, No molecular manipulation, no dimensional folding, just pure organized thought. Admiral Sci-Fi activated the psionic resonance field, and suddenly every mind in the chamber could feel the gentle pressure of the testing protocol. The message was simple, designed for beginners, a basic emotional concept encoded in thought form that even primitive species could usually detect. Mr. Crank, Sci-Fi announced with barely contained glee, simply receive and interpret the psionic message I'm about to transmit. This is elementary communication, used by civilizations that haven't even discovered faster-than-light travel. The message, a simple greeting wrapped in feelings of peaceful intention, projected directly into Tobias's mind with the subtlety of a freight hauler. Tobias sat perfectly still for a moment, then looked around the chamber with genuine confusion. "Did someone just turn up the air conditioning?" he asked. "I felt this weird chill for a second there." The betting pools exploded with activity. Lieutenant Nova was taking wagers on whether humans might actually be legally classified as a non-sentient species. The current favorite was a proposal to reclassify them as particularly clever bacteria. Eclipse leaned over to her colleague. "I've seen asteroid mining equipment with better cognitive processing than this specimen." "At least mining equipment serves a purpose," came the reply from Officer Zayden. "What exactly does humanity contribute to the galaxy? Bathroom humor and maintenance coveralls?" Major Zenith was now 3 paragraphs into his rejection notice, which was shaping up to be a masterpiece of diplomatic brutality. He'd already used the phrases intellectually unprecedented failure, cognitive void of galactic proportions, and his personal favorite, a species so remarkably unsuited for civilization that their application constitutes an unintentional comedy performance. Tobias, meanwhile, had discovered that his chair could swivel and was spinning slowly in place, apparently fascinated by this remarkable technological advancement. Every revolution brought him into view of more council members, each of whom looked like they were witnessing the heat death of the universe in real time. "This is painful to watch," muttered Commander Strider from his position near the emergency exits. "I've seen civilizations fall with more dignity than this evaluation is proceeding." "Should we stop this?" asked Captain Lyra, her voice carrying genuine concern. "This seems almost cruel now, like watching someone try to perform brain surgery with a spoon." But Admiral Sci-Fi was having too much fun. His species had evolved beyond the need for entertainment, but this was special. This was the kind of cosmic joke that would be told at diplomatic gatherings for centuries. "Oh no," he said, his smile widening to proportions that shouldn't have been anatomically possible for his species. "We're just getting started." General Stratus rose from his position at the apex of the council chamber, like a cosmic judge preparing to deliver the final verdict on reality itself. His species, the Omnarch Collective, had transcended individual consciousness eons ago, existing as a shared mental network that spanned 17 star systems. When General Stratus spoke, he spoke with the combined wisdom of 1,000,000,000,000 minds, which made what was about to happen even more humiliating for everyone involved. "Honored delegates," his voice resonated through dimensions that most species couldn't even perceive, "we shall conclude this evaluation with the ultimate test of communicative evolution, quantum consciousness bridging." A collective shiver ran through the assembly. Quantum consciousness bridging wasn't just advanced communication, it was the pinnacle of galactic intellectual achievement. It required temporarily merging one's consciousness with the quantum substrate of reality itself, reading information directly from the universe's source code. Only 12 species in galactic history had ever achieved even basic competency. The testing apparatus that materialized around Tobias looked less like communication equipment and more like a device designed to commune with the fundamental forces of existence. Streams of pure quantum energy swirled in geometric patterns that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The air itself began to hum with the frequency of creation. "This test," General Stratus explained with the patience of someone explaining mathematics to a particularly dense rock, "requires you to interface directly with quantum consciousness fields and interpret meaning from the base-level information structures of reality. The message is encoded in the quantum foam itself." Tobias looked at the swirling maelstrom of cosmic energy surrounding him, with the expression of someone who'd just been asked to repair the universe using only a paperclip and good intentions. "So," he said slowly, "I'm supposed to in the most basic terms." "Yes," General Stratus replied, his voice carrying the weight of civilizations. "Simply open your consciousness to the quantum field and allow the universe to speak through you." What happened next would be discussed in traumatic whispers for generations. Tobias closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and apparently tried to interface with the fundamental structure of reality using whatever passed for consciousness in his species. The quantum apparatus responded immediately, by spectacularly failing in ways that defied several laws of physics. Sparks erupted from crystalline nodes that were supposedly immune to electromagnetic interference. Energy conduits designed to channel pure thought began smoking. Reality interface crystals that had functioned flawlessly for millennia cracked with sounds like the universe clearing its throat. The holographic displays showing quantum consciousness patterns didn't just fail, they inverted, showing what appeared to be the cosmic equivalent of television static having an existential crisis. "By the void," whispered Captain Lyra, her voice barely audible over the sound of advanced technology having a nervous breakdown. "He's not just failing to interface with quantum consciousness, he's actively repelling it." Lieutenant Nova's betting pools had evolved beyond simple failure categories and moved into theological territory. The current favorite was that humans might represent some kind of cosmic error in the universe's operating system. Major Zenith had abandoned his rejection notice entirely and was now drafting what amounted to a petition to the cosmic authorities requesting that humanity be retroactively prevented from evolving. The document was approaching epic poetry in its condemnation of human cognitive abilities. "This is unprecedented," declared Admiral Sci-Fi, his earlier amusement replaced by something approaching scientific horror. "I've never seen consciousness so thoroughly incompatible with quantum interface protocols. It's like watching someone try to communicate with the universe using interpretive dance." The equipment finally gave up entirely, powering down with what could only be described as an electronic sigh of defeat. The quantum energy fields collapsed, leaving behind the acrid smell of burned mathematics and disappointed expectations. General Stratus stared at the smoking remains of technology that had taken his civilization 1,000 years to perfect, then at Tobias, who was examining his fingernails with mild interest. "Perhaps," Captain Lyra said carefully, "we should consider whether humans actually qualify as a sentient species. I mean, in the legal sense, this level of cognitive limitation might place them in a protected category instead." "Like cosmic wildlife," agreed Sergeant Eclipse. "We could establish a nature preserve, keep them from accidentally damaging themselves or others." The council members began murmuring among themselves, discussing the logistics of classifying humanity as a galactic endangered species rather than potential members of civilized society. Tobias looked up from his fingernail inspection and seemed to notice the general atmosphere of cosmic despair surrounding him. "So," he said brightly, "I'm guessing that didn't go so well?" Commander Veyron was in the process of composing what would undoubtedly be the most brutal rejection in galactic history when Tobias raised his hand again. "Actually," the human said, "before you folks write me off completely, could I maybe try one more thing?" The chamber fell silent except for the distant sound of quantum equipment still occasionally sparking. Admiral Sci-Fi leaned forward with the expression of someone watching a particularly fascinating disaster unfold. "By all means, Mr. Crank, please, enlighten us with another demonstration of human capabilities." "Great," Tobias said, his enthusiasm seemingly unaffected by the cosmic scale failure surrounding him. "This'll just take a second." The council settled back to watch what they assumed would be the final crowning moment of humanity's comprehensive demonstration of galactic inadequacy. They had no idea they were about to witness the most terrifying thing in their collective evolutionary history. Tobias cleared his throat with the casual air of someone about to ask for directions to the nearest snack machine. The council members settled into their seats, preparing for what they assumed would be humanity's final pathetic attempt at demonstrating galactic relevance. "Okay, so here's the thing," Tobias said, his voice carrying the conversational tone of someone discussing weekend plans. "You folks seem real impressed with all your fancy translation gadgets and quantum whatsits, but back home we've got this old saying." He paused, glanced around the chamber one more time, then leaned forward slightly and began to whisper. What emerged from his lips wasn't quite sound and wasn't quite silence. It was something that existed in the spaces between concepts, syllables that seemed to fold reality around themselves as they traveled through the air. The words, if they could be called words, carried the weight of geological ages and the whisper-soft touch of civilizations that had crumbled to dust before the first galactic species had learned to count past 10. Koth Morthok Elendil Ne Cyan Lume. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every quantum shield in the Grand Assembly Hall, defensive barriers that could withstand direct hits from stellar-class weapons, simply ceased to exist, not deactivated, not overloaded, but unmade, as if the universe had suddenly forgotten they were supposed to be there. Commander Veyron felt his ceremonial translator crown die against his skull with a sensation like ice water flooding his neural pathways. Around the chamber, 47 different species simultaneously lost the ability to understand each other as their translation matrices didn't just crash, they unraveled, their quantum processors scrambling themselves in patterns that hurt to contemplate. What in the name of cosmic order? Admiral Sci-Fi began, then stopped as his own words emerged as incomprehensible noise. His Valkyrie thought-speech protocols had collapsed entirely, leaving him trapped in the primitive cage of vocal communication like some evolutionary throwback. Vathan Morkellenuin Suidi. Tobias continued his whispered recitation, apparently oblivious to the technological apocalypse unfolding around him. The words seemed to carry their own momentum now, each syllable striking the chamber's advanced systems like precision munitions designed by someone who understood the fundamental architecture of galactic civilization better than the civilizations themselves. Commander Strider's neural implants, military-grade enhancement systems that connected his consciousness directly to the Council's defense network, began smoking inside his skull, literally smoking. Thin wisps of vapor curled from his cranial ports as his cybernetic interfaces burned themselves out, trying to process linguistic patterns that predated their operating principles by millions of years. "Medical emergency," Lieutenant Nova shouted, though her words emerged as a series of clicks and whistles that her own species didn't recognize. The universal nature of the communication breakdown was becoming horrifyingly apparent. "I chin Jalair Colondini Duath." Colonel Vortex, whose species had evolved natural telepathic abilities that made them the galaxy's premier mind readers, suddenly found his consciousness flooded with something that felt like static made of ancient starlight. His telepathic senses, honed over millennia of evolution, scrambled themselves trying to parse thoughts that weren't quite thoughts, concepts that existed in linguistic structures his brain couldn't map. It collapsed from his observation platform, his natural mind-reading abilities now producing nothing but cosmic white noise that tasted like forgotten languages and sounded like the heat death of communication itself. The chamber's emergency systems tried to activate and found themselves locked out of their own networks. Sergeant Axel, the Council's chief security officer, watched in growing horror as his tactical displays showed system after system going dark. Not damaged, not hacked, simply unable to function in the presence of whatever linguistic virus was spreading through their quantum infrastructure. "Protocol 7. Implement Protocol 7, he shouted into his communicator, which responded by producing sounds like a broken symphony composed entirely of question marks. "Anwer duath, veen girthen." The whispered words continued to pour from Tobias like water from a cracked dam, each syllable carrying destructive potential that made antimatter look like a mild inconvenience. The very air in the chamber began to vibrate with harmonics that existed outside normal acoustic theory. Captain Sable's forearms danced frantically across her control interfaces, trying to implement emergency shutdowns before their entire technological infrastructure committed collective suicide. But the harder she tried to activate countermeasures, the more thoroughly her systems failed. It was as if the ancient words were teaching their quantum computers how to forget everything they'd ever learned about basic operation. The emergency klaxons finally managed to activate, though they sounded wrong, like alarms designed by a species that had never heard sound before and was making their best guess. The wailing noise added a soundtrack of technological despair to Tobias's ongoing linguistic assault on galactic civilization. Bar. A bear hail, Dorth hail, layer neon light tulp. Major Zenith's personal datapad containing his carefully crafted rejection notice began displaying text in writing systems that didn't exist. Characters flowed across the screen like living things, rearranging themselves into patterns that conveyed meaning without actually being readable by any known species. The betting pools had evolved beyond gambling and entered the realm of existential crisis. Lieutenant Nova's communication network was now transmitting odds on whether reality itself would survive the next 5 minutes. "Emergency containment," General Stratus commanded, his shared consciousness network fragmenting as a trillion minds suddenly found themselves thinking in languages they'd never learned but somehow understood. "Seal the chamber. Whatever he's doing, we cannot allow it to spread beyond." Oingwed enchant. Gorin Utilier. The containment barriers, quantum-locked force fields that could isolate entire star systems, flickered once and died. The ancient words were spreading beyond the chamber now, carried on subspace frequencies that penetrated every communication protocol in the galactic network. Across 47 different homeworlds, translation systems began failing in cascading waves. Species that hadn't used their original languages in centuries suddenly found themselves thinking in linguistic patterns their ancestors had spoken when the galaxy was young. Commander Veyron, his face pale with something beyond terror, finally managed to force words through his damaged translation system. Stop him. By all the cosmic forces, somebody stop him before he brings down the entire galactic communication grid. But Tobias, still whispering in his impossible language, seemed to be building towards something. The words were gaining momentum, approaching some kind of linguistic crescendo that promised to be even more catastrophic than what had already occurred. Istan tol Asharni vet. And in that moment, every consciousness in the chamber, organic, artificial, and quantum, realized the same terrifying truth. This wasn't a failure. This was a demonstration. And Tobias Crank was just getting started. Lieutenant Ria's emergency research team materialized around portable analysis equipment that had been hastily dragged from their xeno-linguistic archive. Her six-fingered hands flew across holographic interfaces as she attempted to map the acoustic patterns of Tobias's whispered words, even as her own translation implants sparked and died with each syllable. "Command, we're getting readings that don't make sense," she shouted over the continuing chaos, her voice carrying the edge of scientific panic. "The linguistic substrate analysis is showing chronological markers that predate our oldest recorded civilizations by millions of years." The data streaming across her screens defied every principle of galactic linguistic evolution. Languages were supposed to develop complexity over time, growing more sophisticated as civilizations advanced, but these acoustic patterns showed the opposite. A linguistic structure so ancient and refined that it made their most advanced communication protocols look like children's finger painting. "Well, that's impossible," Major Kale called back, abandoning his position at the defense console to peer over Ria's shoulder. "No language survives that long without evolution, without change. The phonetic drift alone would—" He stopped mid-sentence as the analysis revealed something that made his species' equivalent of blood run cold. The pattern recognition algorithms weren't just identifying the language as old, they were identifying it as hostile. "Oh, cosmic void preserve us," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of their civilization's communication infrastructure committing suicide. "It's not just ancient, it's weaponized. These aren't words, they're viral linguistic algorithms designed to attack quantum-based communication systems." The implications hit the research team like a freight hauler moving at light speed. Every advanced species in the galaxy had evolved beyond primitive acoustic communication, developing increasingly sophisticated quantum-based systems. Those same systems now made them vulnerable to something that predated their evolution by geological ages. Tobias, meanwhile, had stopped his whispered recitation and was looking around the chamber with an expression that had transformed from confused maintenance worker to something altogether more dangerous. When he spoke again, his voice carried authority that made the emergency klaxons sound like gentle background music. "Well," he said, his tone shifting from bumbling janitor to something that made seasoned military officers instinctively reach for weapons that no longer functioned, "I suppose the cat's out of the bag now." He reached up and peeled off what everyone had assumed was a name tag, revealing sophisticated biomonitoring equipment underneath. The coveralls followed, showing tactical gear beneath that incorporated technology none of them recognized. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," Tobias continued, his entire demeanor reshaping itself like water finding a new channel. "Tobias Crank, Xenolinguistic Warfare Specialist, First Class, Human Colonial Defense Force, though my friends call me the Tongue Twister. Captain Juno's emergency tactical analysis systems, the few that were still functioning, began providing readouts that made no sense. Her sensors were detecting technology woven into Tobias's clothing that operated on principles her species hadn't encountered before. "Human Colonial Defense Force," she managed to choke out. "You're military?" "Oh, I'm much worse than military," Tobias replied, with a smile that could have powered a small star with its contained malevolence. "I'm a linguist." Lieutenant Ria's analysis equipment finally managed to complete its pattern recognition scan, and the results appeared on screens throughout the chamber. What they showed made 47 different species simultaneously question everything they thought they knew about communication, warfare, and the fundamental nature of reality. 217, Ria announced, her voice hollow with disbelief. The quantum signature analysis indicates humans have preserved and militarized 217 extinct Earth languages, each one specifically evolved to counter different types of advanced communication protocols. The data streams showed linguistic archaeology that spanned millennia. While galactic civilizations had been evolving increasingly sophisticated communication methods, humanity had been doing something entirely different. They'd been preserving their dead languages, studying them, and discovering that what other species saw as primitive acoustic communication contained countermeasures against technological advancement that wouldn't exist for millions of years. Sindarin, Tobias explained conversationally, the language I was just speaking evolved specific phonetic structures that interfere with quantum consciousness bridging. Complete coincidence, of course. The elves who created it were just trying to sound pretty. Major Kale's tactical implants, the few still functioning, were providing threat assessments that registered somewhere between total galactic catastrophe and cosmic joke of unprecedented proportions. Or you're saying, he managed, that your extinct languages accidentally developed countermeasures against technologies that didn't exist when they were spoken? Not accidentally, Tobias corrected, his smile widening. See, here's the thing about humans. We're really good at two things: killing each other and never letting anything actually die. Every dead language on Earth got preserved, studied, and catalogued. And when we started encountering alien tech, well, he shrugged. Turns out linguistic diversity is the ultimate defensive weapon. Captain Juno's analysis systems were now showing her something that made her question whether she was still sane. According to these readings, each preserved language targets specific technological vulnerabilities. This means you've effectively mapped the weaknesses of every advanced communication system in the galaxy. Not just communication, Tobias said cheerfully. Latin interferes with quantum computing matrices. Ancient Egyptian scrambles pionic interfaces. Old Norse does something really interesting to dimensional folding technology, though we're still working out exactly what, and don't get me started on what happens when someone speaks fluent Klingon near a hyperspace navigation system. The council members who were still conscious stared at him with the kind of horror usually reserved for discovering that the universe's fundamental constants had been miscalculated. Klingon isn't even a real language, Commander Strider protested weakly, smoke still curling from his neural implants. Tell that to the Zephyrian battle fleet that lost navigation when one of our diplomats quoted Shakespeare at them in the original Klingon, Tobias replied. Turns out fictional languages work just as well as real ones, sometimes better. Admiral Cypher, his advanced consciousness struggling to process information through primitive vocal communication, finally managed to ask the question that was terrifying everyone. How many humans know these languages? Tobias's smile took on a quality that could have been used to refrigerate entire star systems. Well, he said, I'm actually considered one of the slow ones on my team. There are humans who know over 500 dead languages, and we've been sharing linguistic warfare techniques with our military for about 50 years now. The implications settled over the chamber like a blanket woven from existential dread. Humanity hadn't just accidentally preserved linguistic weapons that could cripple galactic civilization. They'd systematized it, weaponized it, and trained specialists to deploy it. And they'd sent their least competent practitioner to demonstrate it to the Galactic Council. The betting pools had evolved beyond gambling, beyond panic, and entered the realm of species-wide therapy groups. Admiral Helix rose from his command throne with the kind of deliberate movement that suggested someone trying very hard not to panic in front of subordinates. His species, the Corvani hegemony, had built their entire civilization on the principle of perfect information control. The idea that there existed a form of communication they couldn't monitor, translate, or counter was making his secondary nervous system develop what humans might recognize as a migraine. Explain, he demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never had to ask twice for anything in his considerable lifetime. How does a species that scores 0 on basic galactic communication protocols develop capabilities that can cripple our most advanced systems? Tobias leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who'd just revealed he was holding all the cards in a game everyone else thought they'd been winning. See, that's where you folks made your fundamental error, he said, his tone carrying the patient condescension of a teacher explaining basic mathematics to particularly slow students. You all evolved toward perfect communication. Universal translators, quantum consciousness bridging, molecular encoding. You created these beautiful, elegant, unified systems that work flawlessly. He paused to examine his fingernails again, a gesture that now carried entirely different implications. But humans, we're stubborn as cosmic constants. When Latin died as a spoken language, we kept it alive in our universities. When ancient Egyptian became hieroglyphs on museum walls, we made sure linguists could still read every symbol. When Gaelic nearly vanished, we built preservation societies. Admiral Helix felt something his species hadn't experienced in millennia: genuine uncertainty. That makes no logical sense. Why preserve inefficient communication methods when you have superior alternatives? Because, Tobias said with a grin that could have been used to demonstrate the concept of cosmic irony, we never know when we might need them. Humans have this weird quirk: we never let anything truly die if we can help it. Languages, music, recipes for foods nobody eats anymore, instructions for building things nobody needs. We keep it all. Officer Zayden's threat assessment algorithms were producing readouts that made him question his understanding of strategic analysis. His neural processors were highlighting implications that seemed too bizarre to be real. "Wait," he said slowly, his voice carrying the tone of someone making a connection he really didn't want to make. "If you've preserved chaotic linguistic diversity while we've all evolved toward universal communication standards, give the officer a prize," Tobias said cheerfully. "You've created beautiful, standardized systems that work perfectly, which means they all have the same fundamental vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, we've kept thousands of linguistic traditions that operate on completely different principles." The implications were cascading through the chamber's remaining functional analysis systems like dominoes made of pure terror. "You're immune," Officer Zayden continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "to our mental manipulation techniques, our consciousness bridging protocols, our psionic communication arrays." "Pretty much, yeah," Tobias confirmed. "Hard to hack a system that operates on 17 different incompatible protocols simultaneously. When your fancy universal translators try to process human linguistic patterns, it's like trying to run galactic software on a primitive abacus. The architecture just doesn't match." Sergeant Eclipse's tactical calculation systems were still functional enough to run probability analyses on galactic infrastructure vulnerability. The results appeared on her remaining displays in colors that her species associated with imminent doom. "According to preliminary calculations," she announced, her voice carrying the hollow tone of someone delivering their own civilization's obituary, "coordinated human linguistic warfare could disable approximately 58% of galactic communication infrastructure within the first hour of deployment." The number hung in the air like a funeral shroud woven from mathematical certainty. "That's just communication systems," Tobias added helpfully. "We haven't even started testing what our dead languages do to your transportation networks, defense grids, or economic systems. Though I will say, Middle English does some fascinating things to quantum banking protocols." Commander Zoran, a member of a species that communicated primarily through controlled biochemical releases, began secreting stress pheromones at levels that created a visible cloud around his position. His kind hadn't experienced existential terror in their recorded history, but they were learning quickly. "This is why you sent your least competent practitioner?" he managed to ask, his chemical communications creating an aroma that translated roughly to cosmic horror mixed with disbelief. "Well, I wanted to be fair about it," Tobias said with the kind of reasonableness that made mass destruction sound like good manners. "Figured if we sent one of our really good linguists, it might look like showing off. Plus, Command wanted to see how your evaluation process worked before we started discussing our actual application for membership." Major Zenith stared at his personal terminal, where his carefully crafted rejection notice was now displaying itself in what appeared to be ancient Sumerian. He reached over and quietly deleted the entire document, watching with fascination as the deletion command somehow translated itself into hieroglyphics before processing. "Your actual application?" Admiral Helix asked, though his voice suggested he was afraid to hear the answer. "Oh, this was just the preliminary demonstration," Tobias explained with the casual air of someone discussing weekend picnic plans. "We wanted to make sure you folks understood what humanity brings to the galactic community before we start formal diplomatic relations." Lieutenant Rhea's analysis equipment chose that moment to provide an update that made everyone in the chamber simultaneously wish they'd chosen different careers. "Additional linguistic signatures detected," she reported, her voice carrying the monotone of someone who'd reached their limit for processing impossible information. "The quantum resonance patterns suggest this demonstration utilized approximately 3% of the subject's available linguistic arsenal." 3%. The words echoed through the chamber with the finality of a cosmic death sentence. Tobias looked around the room at 47 species who were simultaneously realizing that their entire understanding of communication, warfare, and galactic politics had just been turned inside out by a maintenance worker in Coveralls. "So," he said brightly, "shall we discuss humanity's membership application now?" Major Valco shot to his feet with the kind of urgency usually reserved for stellar collapse warnings or accidentally declaring war on neighboring galaxies. His species, renowned for their methodical approach to decision-making, had evolved past the concept of panic approximately 12,000 years ago. Today they were rediscovering it with remarkable enthusiasm. "Emergency Council session," he declared, his voice cracking across frequencies his species shouldn't have been able to produce. "Immediate priority override. All standard protocols are hereby suspended pending comprehensive reassessment of humanity's membership status." The motion carried with the kind of unanimous support typically only seen during votes to increase emergency rations or flee from cosmic horrors. Lieutenant Cass, her four-dimensional thinking matrix still struggling to process the last 30 minutes, raised what passed for a hand among her species. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "we should also reconsider our entire evaluation methodology. It appears our testing protocols may have been inadequate." Inadequate? Admiral Cypher let out what might charitably be called laughter, though it sounded more like a dying star having second thoughts. "Our evaluation system just classified a species capable of dismantling galactic civilization as mentally deficient. I'm beginning to think we might not be as intelligent as our own propaganda suggests." Tobias, who had been observing this meltdown with the detached interest of someone watching an entertaining documentary, decided to contribute to the conversation. "Oh, you folks shouldn't feel too bad," he said with the kind of reassuring tone usually reserved for comforting small children or traumatized survivors. "Like I mentioned, I'm actually the slow one on our team. There are humans back home who've memorized over 500 dead languages, plus all their historical variants, regional dialects and ceremonial pronunciations." The silence that followed could have been weaponized. 500. Lieutenant Cass repeated slowly, as if testing whether the words would make more sense if spoken aloud. "Well, Dr. Margaret Chen holds the current record with 643, but she's showing off," Tobias continued conversationally. "Most of our battlefield linguists cap out around 400 to 500. Any more than that and you start getting cognitive overflow during rapid deployment scenarios." Sergeant Raven's strategic analysis protocols were attempting to calculate defensive measures against potential human linguistic warfare capabilities. Her results kept coming back with recommendations that essentially boiled down to surrender immediately and hope they're feeling merciful. "Defense strategies against linguistic attack vectors," she announced, her voice carrying the tone of someone reading her own death warrant, "fall into 3 categories: impossible, impractical, and prayer to cosmic entities." Her tactical display showed scenarios where human teams could disable entire star system communication networks using nothing more threatening than poetry recitations and ancient shopping lists. Colonel Soren, whose species had devoted their entire civilization to the study of interstellar law, was frantically accessing legal databases with the desperate energy of someone trying to prevent an accidental galactic war. "We need new treaties," he announced, his voice carrying the edge of someone who'd just realized their life's work had become obsolete. "Immediate protocols governing linguistic warfare deployment. Restrictions on dead language preservation. Mandatory notifications before historical linguistic research. Something, anything, to prevent humanity from accidentally ending civilization while discussing etymology." The legal implications were staggering. How do you regulate weapons that consist entirely of words? How do you monitor threats that sound like academic discussions? How do you defend against enemies who could disable your entire infrastructure by reading ancient poetry? General Azara had been conducting her own strategic assessment, and the results were making her question fundamental assumptions about galactic power structures that had stood unchallenged for millennia. "Colleagues," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone announcing the end of an era, "humanity has just become the most dangerous species in known galactic space, not through superior technology, not through military might, but through the simple act of remembering their own history." The implications rippled through the chamber like shockwaves from a supernova. Every alliance, every treaty, every carefully balanced power structure in galactic politics had just been rendered obsolete by maintenance workers who collected dead languages as a hobby. "The motion is clear," Commander Veyron announced, his earlier smugness replaced by something that looked suspiciously like survival instinct. "All in favor of granting humanity immediate full membership status with special diplomatic honors, unlimited access to galactic facilities, and priority consideration for all future council positions?" 47 hands, tentacles, appendages, and probability manipulation organs shot up with the speed of species fleeing extinction. "Motion carried unanimously," Veyron declared. Welcome to the Galactic Council, Representative Crank. Your species now holds full membership with all associated privileges, benefits, and please don't hurt us. The formal dignity of galactic diplomacy was officially dead. Tobias looked around the chamber, taking in the sight of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations collectively offering him anything he wanted in exchange for not accidentally ending their technological infrastructure. He appeared to consider this for a moment, then raised his hand with the tentative gesture of someone asking an important question. "So," he said, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic significance, "does this mean I can finally use the executive washroom? Because I've really needed to go this whole time, and your regular facilities had some kind of quantum lock I couldn't figure out." The tension in the chamber built from existential terror, diplomatic revolution, and the complete restructuring of galactic civilization shattered like crystal hitting bedrock. 47 species, who moments before had been contemplating the end of their technological supremacy, began laughing with the kind of hysteria that comes from realizing that the most dangerous being in known space was still primarily concerned with bathroom access. Yes, General Azara managed between what passed for laughter among her species. "You can use any washroom in the galaxy. Please, we insist." And somehow, that seemed like the most reasonable diplomatic concession in galactic history. Humanity had just conquered the galaxy through the power of linguistic archaeology and bathroom humor. It was the most human victory possible.